Hello everyone. I know this isn't our usual fun adventure vlogs, but this has been highly requested on my Instagram, so I am finally making the video for it. So with this loose leash heel tutorial, sorry, that's a lot to say, we are going to be showing you how to set your goals, how to take the steps to getting this heel, and how we deal with frustration, mistakes that happen with your dog, and how to handle these situations. With this is not going to be an overnight miracle. Your dog is not going to get it right away. Some dogs may catch on to it really quickly, and some dogs might take time. So there's many reasons people would want to train a loose leash heel, whether it's not wanting to have your arm yanked out on a nice walk, or whether it's just to teach your dog something new, or whether you have a service dog in training and you'd really like them to heel better while they're working, or if you're using certain training tools and you're kind of hoping to wean your dog off of that. Each of these steps will help you get towards that goal. With all that being said, please understand that this is not an overnight miracle. This will take time and dedication. I recommend at least once a day for 5 minutes to practice this. With that being said, I know that's not completely ideal for everyone, whether it be health issues or a very busy life. I know it's hard to dedicate 5 minutes every day. I find it a struggle sometimes. But hey, even if it's for a minute every second day or third day, it's still something. You're still working towards it, so don't give up on it. Service dog handlers, please do not take offense to this. I do not recommend you starting to teach this heel while you are doing public access. But that's the whole point of wanting to teach to this loose leash heel, right? Exactly. We want to take very small steps before we get to the big environments that are distracting. I always recommend that you start at home, whether it's with a puppy or a young dog or your current dog in training. I always recommend that you start at home, inside your house first, teach heel from a position, a standstill, which I will be showing you how to do, and then move on to maybe your yard, whether it's fenced or not fenced. And then from there, from the yard, you move on to the street where you go walk up and down the street or around your block. Then from there, you can move to walking around town or further down the street. I do not recommend doing PA until your dog is super solid in these environments that I just listed. Don't freak out too much. I recommend pulling your dog from public access for at least a week and a half. These are just my recommendations that I'm listing off before I get to our training. I also recommend putting aside task training because focusing on this heel will make task training so much easier once the heel is solid. Please note, to get your dog to heel like this without asking, it can take up to quite a few months to perfect it, so please realize that you need to dedicate a lot of time to the heel specifically. All right, to start off this training, we of course have to start with treats. These are high value reward treats. I call them Bumblebee's working treats. He only gets them when he's working. He does not get them when he's off duty. Using high value treats like this for specifically training or working time will help your dog associate doing this loose leash heel without you having to ask them constantly to get back into heel. I use a soft treat that I cut up for him and put in a plastic bag, and then I put soft wet treats that are squeezable into a travel size shampoo bottle for an extra high value reward treat. The soft treats that I'm cutting up are called rollover. They come in a variety of different flavors, salmon, chicken, lamb, beef. I usually use the beef because that's Bumblebee's favorite flavor. Then for the extra high value reward treat, the squeeze tubes, I use either like a puree from like a Go Booster pack or some purees that come in like cat food packs. I specifically usually use the Go Booster packs because they're easier. Please keep in mind when buying these little packages of puree meat, some of them will have little meat chunks in them or say minced meat on them. Don't get those ones. Those ones will clog up your tube and make it not squeezable. Please make sure it says puree on it. Both of these treats must be refrigerated when not in use. I understand there can be sensitive stomachs or picky eaters out there, but this is what I recommend as high value reward treats. But you guys choose what you need to suit your needs. I just don't recommend using their kibble because unless they're puppies, like baby puppies, I just find working with high value treats when they are on the job or when they're in training makes them have a little more drive. That drive and interest in what you want them to do is really important for training this heel, which is why I suggest only keeping these high value treats for when they're working or training. Once you and your dog perfect this heel, you won't even need high value treats all the time. I just prefer to use them when Bumblebee's working because I think he deserves a high value treat when he's doing the job that I'm asking him to do. And he does it really well and he works really hard to keep me safe. So I believe that he deserves a good treat. That is just a personal preference of mine. Here he is in this video as an example. I forgot my gear because we just went dock diving and I wasn't planning on working him that day. But here he is in a loose leash heel, listening to every command I give him, despite me not having his gear, his usual collar, or his usual high reward treats because I forgot them. I only had kibble with me at this time. And he's working in a loose leash heel. He's walking with me. He's paying attention. He even ignored my mom, who gave him a little pat. These are just simple examples of the fact that you can do this heel without high value treats. It's just a matter of your dog's experience level. So this is step number 1 for how I teach this heel. So what you want to do is take your high value treat, put it in front of your dog's nose, and lure them to the position beside you and say heel. This is something you're going to repeat and repeat and repeat until your dog is perfectly beside you and facing the same way you are. So keep doing that from a sit still and do not lure them into heel quite yet. I'll tell you why in just a moment, but first I'm going to show you how to get your dog into heel position from a different way. Put your high value treat in front of their nose, say heel, and lead them behind you, back beside you into the heel position. This is called around or behind. This is another way to get your dog into the heel position. I prefer to do it from the side because, again, it's hard for me to turn around sometimes with vertigo and whatnot. But I do recommend when you're putting the treat behind you to pass it to your other hand rather than awkwardly do what I did. Please be patient with your dog, as some dogs get overly excited when training. When luring them into position, it's not uncommon for them to either stick their butt out or try and face you or face the complete wrong direction. Just be patient. Your dog will get this over time. I do not recommend moving on from step 1 if you still have to lure your dog into the heel position when you're at a standstill. To be able to move on to the next step, your dog should recognize what the word heel means and automatically get into the position beside you. Once they're in that position without a lure, you can reward them. For step 2, you want to grab yourself a treat and then hold it in front of their nose as you lure them forward with you as you walk. When you do this and when you first step off, I recommend you step off with your left foot or whichever foot is closest to your dog's side. Stepping forward with the foot that's closest to your dog can help them recognize that they should be moving with you. This is just a small tip that can help teach your dog to heel next to you and move with you, especially if you're also trying to teach them to do a good stay, whereas one foot, the one that's closest to them, means movement, let's move with me, and then the other foot, the opposite away from them, means that they should be stationary when you walk away from them. Now, one of the biggest things I didn't speak about is equipment and what you want your dog to heel in. I have always taught my dogs to heel on a flat collar. Now, do my dogs still pull in a flat collar or any collar that I put on them? Absolutely. I'm going to tell you how I deal with this and what we can do when your dog does this. First things first, you have to make boundaries for yourself and your dog. When is it appropriate for them to walk ahead of you? When is it appropriate for them to put a little bit of pressure on the leash? Is it the equipment that's making them walk nice, or is it the equipment that's letting them pull? Setting boundaries can help you answer those questions. In my opinion, whether you have a halti or a prong collar or something else that you're using to help you slow your dog down when they're pulling, I don't think those things really matter. It matters with the training. This is absolutely the reason why this training is so crucial. It doesn't matter whether you're using a prong collar, a halti, a flat collar, a slip lead, or a choke chain, because in the end, they're just training tools. They're not there to slow your dog down. You are there to teach them not to pull. No matter what tool you use, your dog can still attempt to pull, if not pull in it. Once you start relying heavily on the training tool you're using to make your dog heel, your dog becomes very collar smart, where they know which collar they're wearing and what one they can use to get away with absolutely ripping your arm off. No, I'm not calling out anyone who uses tools for their service dog, their dog in training, whichever. I have used those tools in the past and current while walking my dogs or while training my service dogs. As a personal preference, I prefer not to use these tools when training my service dogs anymore. It's just a personal preference of mine because this method I have been using for years has really worked with my service dogs and it's been exceptionally successful. And the biggest part of it is letting your dog make mistakes. Once you have mastered getting your dog to recognize heel position from a standstill and walking ahead at least 10-15 steps without a lure in front of their nose, without them breaking their heel beside you, you can move on to step 3 and take these new skills either up the street or around your yard completely. I recommend just doing these short distances for 10 to 15 minutes to make this session successful for yourself. If you feel confident in your dog's ability, you may go around the block. When can my dog walk loosely and when can my dog pull on the leash a little bit? Well, an easy thing to do with that is give a release command or a free command. I'm not really going to touch the topic of free command right now, but maybe later. Here I'm walking two dogs. One is in a loose heel and the other, Bumblebee, is pulling me. A little bit of tension on the leash is fine, but putting too much tension on the leash is too much for me. So here I'm allowing him to make his mistake. I ask him to come into heel. He does, and then he immediately starts to walk off ahead of me again. Instead of snapping the leash back and telling him no, I just stopped myself completely. I continue on a couple steps, and when he gets ahead of me again, I just stop again and allow him to process what's going on. Bumblebee did correct himself by coming into heel position, but because he kept making this mistake, I just backed myself up, reset ourselves, and we continue on again. Bumblebee knows I'm not expecting him to heel perfectly on a walk like this. I'm actually just asking him to not put tension on the leash. And that is the main goal with this loose leash heel, is you don't want your dog to be putting an excessive amount of pressure and tension on the leash. I don't expect my dogs to heel perfectly 24/7, especially Bumblebee when he's working. I don't expect him to heel 24/7 when he's working. My main goal is for him to recognize when he's putting too much pressure on the leash and when he should correct himself. It's important not to frustrate yourself with micromanagement while you're training this heel. Allow your dog to start making a mistake. Don't allow it to escalate. Correct them by asking them to come back into heel. And if they start immediately coming out of their heel after you just corrected them, stop yourself and them, allow them to process for a minute, and then turn around and reset yourself completely and give yourself time. And repeat this if you have to. But don't frustrate yourself or frustrate your dog if they're not getting what you're asking them to do. Take a break and then come back to it in about 10-15 minutes. If getting them into the heel position beside you is the only thing you can accomplish from the constant resets you had to do, stop there. Do not go any further. Because if you continue to push, you start to stress yourself out and then you stress your dog out. And then when that happens, the training's not enjoyable anymore, and then the dog's gonna avoid trying to do this heel. So after fully resetting myself, here's Bumblebee in a loose leash walk. He's not in heel, but he is walking loosely, not putting tension on the leash. There, I just told him to release, which you could see him trot off there and put a little bit of tension on the leash. And then I asked him to heel on my right side, and he did so without question. And he is walking loosely beside me, giving me plenty of eye contact. Here, I tell him to release again. With this release, he's in a high energy area where there's lots to sniff. He put tension on the leash. I stopped myself completely. Bumblebee returned to me, went back into heel position. Then we continued on again. He's walking a lot looser and he's paying more attention to me when I stop. This stop and go is time consuming and it can be frustrating at times for both you and the dog. But this is the most effective way I've found to teach your dog to walk loosely on a leash rather than pulling and yanking your arm off 24/7. This doesn't mean I never allow my dogs to pull or put tension on the leash. Obviously, that's not true, or else Bumblebee and Ezio wouldn't be pulling me right here. It's all a matter of training and whether your dog understands what you're asking them. I do this stop-go process and don't put tension on the leash while we are walking by ourselves or whether we're with a group of people walking their dogs. It doesn't matter. I still do the same process because in the end, it's about me and my dogs and their training and their ability to listen when I ask them to do something. And it doesn't matter what others think about you or whether they think you're being a helicopter parent with your dog. In the end, it's about you and your dog and making walking or working together enjoyable for each other. Back on the topic of gear and collars and whatever you want to use on your dog while teaching this heel. While first training this skill, I do it while they're completely naked with no equipment except for their collar. Once I'm confident that they know exactly what heel position is, I start to put gear on them. The reason why I don't put service dog gear on them when I'm training my dog to do this heel is simply because I don't want them to associate that this heel is only when I ask them to do work mode. This loose leash heel is a skill, not a part of the uniform. But with that being said, I do recommend putting on their gear every time you train this loose leash heel from then on if you are wanting this for your service dog. I am in no way saying that your dog associating this loose leash heel with their gear or their vest or whatever is a bad thing. It's not. Honestly, I do like that luxury of having to put on a vest or a harness and then all of a sudden my dog snaps into automatic heel, which is why I'm telling you it's a good idea from now on to train in your harness or in your vest while you're training this heel. Just because I'm telling you to train your dog to do this heel in their gear doesn't mean I'm telling you not to continue that out of their gear as well. It's still important to practice this heel, whether it's in the yard, up and down the street, on your sniffy walks, or on your hikes with your dog. It's a really good idea to always practice heel position and loose leash heel, whether your dog is in gear or not. Now, don't get too excited that I'm telling you to put your service dog in gear while you're doing this loose leash heel training. I still recommend that you stay out of public access while you're training this heel. Stick to your yard, the street, going around your town or around your block while doing this heel training in your dog's gear. Once you think your dog is confident in that loose leash heel without being distracted by the world around them, saying cars going by, neighborhood stuff going on, or just town stuff going on. If your dog is able to continue keeping this loose leash heel well in their gear and walking around this stuff outside in the environment, then you can move on to public access. If your dog is becoming too distracted or is taking too many corrections to get back into heel and loose leash walking, I recommend going back to the basic steps we started with. If your dog is behaving like this inside of a public store that you are doing public access in while trying to train this loose leash heel, I also recommend taking a step back and pulling yourself from public access. Now, when coming back into public access with this new skill, I do recommend that you go to a pet-friendly establishment, say like Bass Pro or some sort of shop that is allowed to have pets but doesn't get them as often as, say, like a pet store would. I recommend doing this simply just to gauge your dog's skill level while in a public store. Are they distracted by the environment and unable to engage in this heel? Is it taking too many corrections to be able to get a loose leash heel? If this behavior is frustrating you and overwhelming you, please go back to the previous steps and pull yourself and your dog from public access work. Don't worry, take a deep breath. You don't want to create a negative experience for yourself and your dog while doing public access again for the first time. I also do not recommend, while you're doing this public access heel training, to do task training as well, especially if you're in a harness doing balance assistance or forward momentum pull. I highly recommend not doing that while training this heel in public access. You want to be especially sure that your dog's heel, loose leash heel, is very solid before you even attempt to do tasks that require them to pull into the harness or pull away from you. That is simply because it's super easy for them to absolutely forget about the loose leash heel you've been teaching them for quite a long time, which is why it's important that your dog is solid in their loose leash heel before you move on to task training, especially mobility tasks. But with that being said, if your dog's heel is solid, I would recommend doing transitions where you let them do forward momentum pull in the harness, and then a couple minutes later, you're going back to loose leash heel. Just do those transitions to assure that your dog is still solid in their loose leash heel when you need it. Now that I have explained that, I'm going to move forward here and tell you what I do when I bring my dog back into public access for the first time while using this heel. I'm bringing my service dog back into public access, especially areas that aren't pet friendly, such as grocery stores. I highly recommend going to a store that they're very familiar with. So my number one tip when bringing them back into public access, especially grocery stores, is make them walk against aisles or coolers. Have yourself in between them and a cooler, or them and an aisle or a shelf. Walking against shelves and coolers can help your dog recognize that they shouldn't be turning left or right or pulling you left and right without you asking them to turn in those directions. When doing this, it's also easier to recognize when they're making mistakes and when you should be correcting them. If your dog does not have a solid leave it or is uncomfortable walking next to a cooler or the shelf or small area you're walking in, you may need to take a step back from public access and reassess those issues and then return when you think your dog is solid. Another tip is when you are doing this heel against a cooler or shelf, please give a little bit of space in between the shelf and your dog, because you don't want their gear to catch onto the product or shelf or cooler and have it spook your dog suddenly because they got caught up on something. You don't want a negative experience for your dog while they're doing this heel. Walking close against items such as shelves and coolers is pretty natural when it comes to walking through a grocery store with your service dog, but it's good to be spatially aware of your surroundings for your dog and yourself. You are allowed to take up space. Speaking of space, here's Bumblebee going back into heel position, but he kind of takes a long way around, and sometimes he drags behind me for like a second before he can turn around, which is totally fine. You do not need to micromanage the fact that your dog is not directly beside you every time you turn. Do not worry about that. Your dog is doing wonderful. If you are using a specific training tool such as a prong collar, a halti, or a slip lead while doing public access and doing this loose leash heel, I recommend having a double-ended leash so you can be attached to both your training tool and your flat collar or whatever collar you're wanting to work your dog in. I highly recommend that you do that before you even go back into public access. Do that from the get-go when you're starting to train this heel if you have already started training with a training tool. That way, when you hold the leash, your main collar should be your flat collar rather than your training tool or whatever the collar you're using, choke chain. You want to have that be your main hand, and if you need be, use your correction with your training tool on the other end of the lead. That way, it just makes it easier to move away from your training tool when you feel that you're confident in your dog's ability to heel next to you and take corrections when you're mainly using the flat collar rather than your training tool. It also helps with dogs that become collar smart when they only have their training tool on. It helps them recognize that, you know what, they can do this heel without their training tool just as well. When you are working in busy environments or in public access, please do not be afraid to use all the tips given to you in this tutorial so far. Please do not be afraid to lure your dog into heel position, lure your dog into heel, and keep them in the heel with a lure while you're doing public access. Please pretend like you're restarting the whole process of this heel all over again when you re-enter public access. And don't forget to make it fun for your dog. Get them to come into heel position, get them to back up, get them to stop, get them to turn. It's good to keep them thinking while they're doing this heel so they don't get bored with it. It's important, especially when you go back out into public access after these weeks and weeks and weeks of training this heel. You need to solely focus on yourself and your dog when doing public access. You need to bring a significant other, a friend, a parent, or guardian with you to do your shopping rather than you trying to shop and train your dog at the same time. And the last little tip here is always have your high reward treats, especially your wet food or squeeze tube treat. They are essential to help lure your dog and keep your dog in heel while also rewarding them for actually doing the heel you're asking them to do. Now let's do a quick review. We taught our dogs how to get into heel position beside us from a standstill. Then we moved on to stepping off with your dog heeling next to you, using your foot that's closest to your dog to let them know that, hey, we're both moving together, while also holding a treat in front of your dog's nose, letting them nibble on it as you walk forward in this heel position. With your dog slowly nibbling on that treat as you continue to walk, it keeps them in the position next to you as you do a heel. With both of those steps, eventually you are able to say the word heel and your dog jumps into heel position beside you. Then you are able to walk at least 10 to 15 steps forward with your dog in a tight heel right next to you. We then moved on to boundaries and when your dog should be walking ahead of you and putting a little bit of tension on the leash, and when your dog should be loose leash heeling consistently without putting tension on the leash. We also quickly touched on the subject of whether training tools are essential for training this heel or not. We learned that these training tools can help your dog learn what a heel is, but you should not be depending on these tools to make your dog heel. Consistently following the steps that we've given you will help your dog achieve this loose leash heel even without tools. But you must be consistent with this training and do maintenance training and do constant drills once a week, twice a week, once a day. You must do these steps regularly to be able to achieve this heel. Boundaries. This is where we learned when we can let our dogs walk ahead of us and come out of their loose leash heel, and when we shouldn't let them put tension on the leash. The whole point of this heel is that your dog isn't putting an excessive amount of tension on the leash. When they are allowed to put tension on the leash, a little bit of tension, not a lot, or when they are allowed to walk ahead of you and out of the heel position is when they go on pack walks, hikes, walks around town, sniffy walks. Those are all moments in time when my dogs do not need to be in a consistent heel right next to me. Despite those being times my dog can walk ahead of me and pull a little bit on the lead, these are moments where I allow my dog to make a small mistake and not escalate this mistake. When correcting your dog, you want to stop yourself completely, allow them to process, and reset yourself if you need by taking yourself and your dog back to the same position you started from and then starting from square one again. Moments when I correct my dog is when they walk too far ahead of me and they are pulling consistently on the leash. That is when I will stop myself and do those corrections. This is also how I correct my service dog when we are out in public. If he starts to walk ahead of me, I stop myself, allow him to process and maybe correct himself and come back into heel position. Whether you have to do the correction or whether your dog does the correction on his own, please reward them for that. We also talked about gear and whether it's okay to let your dog associate their service dog gear with this heel. I think it's totally fine if your dog associates heel mostly with their gear rather than when they're outside of their gear, as long as your dog is still able to achieve this heel, whether it's wearing gear or whether it's not. I think it's totally fine if your dog heels better when they're in their vest or when they're in their harness. I am aware that Bumblebee certainly does this. I don't see an issue with it because I am still able to call him into work mode or heel, whether he's in his harness, his vest, or not. This is why I often tell people to practice this heel in a variety of gear, whether it's a flat collar or their harness or vest, or whether they're completely naked and you're just in your yard. This is why I tell people train your dog with gear and train your dog without gear. With or without it, your dog should be performing all the same. We then touched up on the subject of when to bring your service dog back into public access. Once your service dog is heeling consistently around town and around your block and in your yard or up the street in distracting environments, then you can bring yourself back into public access training. Starting with pet-friendly stores such as Bass Pro, Canadian Tire, places that typically allow pets but don't get a lot of high traffic of pets coming into the store. Once your dog is consistently heeling in environments like that, you can move back to a grocery store or a public access store that is not pet friendly that your dog is very, very familiar with. It's a good idea to stick to these familiar stores just so you can gauge your service dog's level of where they are with this heel in a store that doesn't allow pets. A little tip that we covered was walking your dog close to shelves or coolers, having your dog in between yourself and a cooler or yourself and a shelf. Haha, that rhymed. Having your dog in between you and a shelf or a cooler helps them with positioning when they're doing this heel. When doing this, make sure there's a little bit of space between your dog and the shelf or cooler so they're not getting caught up on the items. I do not recommend teaching your dog any tasks in harness such as pulling, forward momentum pull, or any sort of task that requires your dog to move ahead of you and pull. While you are training this heel, I do not recommend any of those tasks. Not until your dog shows you that they are consistent in their loose leash heel in multiple different stores and new stores that you've gone to. When taking this heel into public, make sure you have your high value treats and your high value, extra high value wet treats with you. Don't be afraid to use steps 1 through 3. Don't be afraid to lure your dog the entire time to keep that consistent heel position. When training in public, I highly recommend that you bring a friend, a sibling, a partner with you so they can do your shopping for you, or just tag along with them when they do go out. This is so you can solely focus on yourself and your dog. Now that we've reviewed everything in this video, it's time for you to tell me what you think. Should I do a part 2 to this video? Is there things that you would like me to cover that I missed? Is there something that I can explain a little better? Is there something else you would like me to show you how to do? Please let me know. I do read the comments. I may not reply to them right away, and I'm sorry if I haven't replied to you. I have read your comments. I just haven't had the time to reply. I also forget because I'm not on YouTube very often, but I am certainly trying to be. Anyway, please let me know down below in the comments. In the description, I will put the links to the treats that I've used and the shampoo bottles. And with that, thank you everyone for tuning in, and we will catch you on our vlogs in the next video.